Welcome to Slash Forward. In this episode, we're going to revisit a classic in mutant redneck savagery with the Wes Craven original, The Hills Have Eyes. If you've ever lived to regret abandoning your mutant children in the desert, you're probably not in a good position to subscribe right now. But when you can, go for it. Let's get to it. We open on a quaint little town comprised solely of a service station. Here we find Sonny Jim packing up all his earthly belongings in preparation for skipping town. Ruby arrives to see if she can swap out some stolen goods in exchange for food, because her clan is hungry. But he's all out of trading stock and no longer desires to support their desert pirate lifestyle. Seeing an opportunity for a new life free of violence and thievery, she begs to come along.
You stink like a horse.
But he's unconvinced that she'll blend into polite society as easily as he. All final decisions are put on hold, however, when a group of customers arrive unexpectedly. Fred agrees to one last fill-up as they all file out and stretch their legs. He learns this mixed family is on their way to California, but are hoping to swing through the nearby silver mine along the way and hopefully pick themselves up a couple of nuggets. Fred warns them off, confirming the mine is all dried out, and they'd be better served continuing on their way and sticking to the main roads. The family finishes their business and continues on. Unfortunately, their patronage, which nets Fred a cool $7, also delays him long enough for someone to set an explosive in his truck, resulting in it getting blowed up. Back on the road, Big Bob is used to doing things his own way and declines to take no for an answer. Thinking the warnings were a ploy for Fred to keep all the remaining precious silver for himself, he forges on. He's so domineering that he also shuts his whole family the hell up when they start freaking out about the map indicating they're entering an Air Force test site. But he's unable to ignore the low-flying fighter jets, and this revelation sets old Bob to accelerate into the point where he loses control of the wagon and runs them aground. With another opportunity now to stretch their legs, little Bobby faces Brenda before running off and pulling a flipsy-do, like a proper asshole. And then Big Bob acts like a big bitch and throws a massive fit. As he assesses the damage, we see that they're being watched, and with a broken axle, it appears they're in for a long walk. They decide that Doug will head north while Big Bob heads back to the station. Little Bobby is tasked with hanging back and keeping the women in line with his gat. Then they circle up for a quick prayer and to ensure their travels are covered in Jesus' blood. At the RV, they set up a dinner table while Beauty goes nuts over an unseen danger. This makes them all nostalgic about that one time Beast killed some old lady's poodle, and they all laugh about it. Then dumbass Brenda lets her loose, and she instantly tears off toward the rocks, where we hear a voice coaxing her further. Bobby gives chase and eventually hears her squeals of distress off yonder. He climbs until he finds her carcass, but he's shooed off by a figure in the brush and ends up taking a tumble on the way back. Figuring this may be their chance to be free of him, none of the ladies apparently bother to go find him, instead focusing on trying to raise some help on the CB. They were hoping to perhaps reach a helpful trucker, but they seem to get a perverted trucker instead, as the only response is some heavy breathing. When Lynn goes out to check on Brenda, we see that she's taken Beast to go find Bobby, and he eventually emerges from the darkness. Sullen about his failure, he heads back without a word. Meanwhile, Big Bob has made it back to the station. He finds the truck in ruins and the phone not working. Using all of his experience from his time on the force, he sneaks back quietly and just barely dodges a bullet before returning fire. When he opens the door, he finds old Fred changing a light bulb. In the subsequent conversation, Fred regales him with the sad story of his freako son, who, when he was born, came out sideways, huge and hairy as a monkey. As he got older, they found him prone to setting fires and killing animals. And after losing his house and family in a deliberately set fire, Fred took the boy out to the desert and left him for dead. But instead of dying, he grew strong, stole himself a hooker, and started raising a family of renegade mutants. Bob is naturally incredulous, but before Fred can try to convince him further, a renegade mutant busts through the window and scratches him, providing all the necessary convincing. When Bob goes out to investigate the matter, all he finds is Fred's body, now divorced from his soul. Back at the trailer, they compare notes and begin to get the creeping suspicion that something may be wrong. And then a noise draws Bobby out, and he discovers that Beast is missing. As he makes this discovery, we see Bob doing his best to get back to his family despite his enlarged heart, which sounds like a positive character trait but is actually a serious medical condition. When he goes down, Papa Jupiter reveals himself and lets his kin know they're almost ready. As they make the final preparations, Doug arrives back at the campsite. He didn't find help, but he did run across a defunct junkyard. And just look at all this sweet cord! As they wait for scrap, we find Ruby back at the cave. Conflicted about eating Beauty, while listening to the sorrowful house howls of Beast, and she hopes Mama will reconsider and let her back in soon. And meanwhile, out in a field somewhere, Bob is getting pinned to a tree. As the rest of them wind down for the evening, the things Bobby's seen are weighing on him, and he tries to convince Doug not to spend the night in the wagon. But he refuses to express his concerns in front of the ladies, and Doug has some wild oats to sow. So when Lynn walks into the room, it basically assures that they're in for a rough night. But Doug at least gets to practice his trade as a master coxsman. While distracted with this, Pluto sneaks in to siphon their gasoline. Bobby hops out for a little fresh air and hears Beast whining in the distance, so he Naruto runs in that direction. But then he hears a series of additional farm animal noises and gets scared off. Upon his return, he finds the RV locked and is unaware that it's now in Pluto's custody. He keeps his eyes closed tight and goes to knock on the window so he can acquire a backup set of keys from Doug. Once they're unencumbered by their nudity, Bobby comes clean and tells them about the strange happenings of the evening, and otherwise acts his absolute nards off. They go back to the RV together, and right as they hit the door, Pluto gives the high sign, setting off a distraction nearby that results in Big Bob screaming into the night sky. The family finds him burning on the cross, and they work to douse him as Pluto and Mars take control of the RV. They eat and drink their fill, but must be doing okay, because Mars only finds it necessary to retain approximately 50% of the bounty inside his mouth. They then have a dispute about who gets Brenda, and hoping that she'll decide to proactively choose one of them, Mars attempts a compliment.
You fat and juicy.
Well, that's inappropriate. Back out in the field, they get Bob off the cross and split up. The ladies to get water and blankets, and Bobby to go find the assailants and bring them to justice. But back at the RV, they find Mars attempting to steal the baby, resulting in a struggle. Ethel brought a broom to a gunfight and gets shot, predictably. Brenda then slides a knife toward Lynn so she can do the dirty work, and she manages to slide it into his thigh despite taking 2 shots herself. But then the fellas arrive, and with no more ammo, they're forced to run. Doug assesses the damage and realizes they've made off with his baby, so he runs off to scream into the darkness. And despite that, they don't even bother to bring her back. The Scuzzies have a bit of a mixed bag of outcomes here as they celebrate over the radio with their brother Mercury. But right after, Beast comes up and helps him pull a triple gator face first into a rock, and then he takes off with his radio. While they all agree back at the campsite that it's good fun eating babies, there is some concern about Mercury's absence, and Jupiter wonders if they did a sufficiently good job of killing everyone, as he instructed. Back at the RV with the survivors in shock, a noise outside causes Bobby to fire on the door. After carefully opening it, they find the chatter coming from a radio, which it appears may have been dropped by Beast. They listen and learn that Pluto has gone to check on Mercury and has discovered that his dive created a bigger splash than intended, which sets Jupiter into a rage. He vows revenge to Bob's carcass, which they're currently consuming, so he's kind of already won, I'd think. But the loss does seem to prevent them from taking any real pleasure in eating out this old man. At dawn's first light, we see Doug and Beast roaming the rocky terrain and crossing paths with 2 of their assailants. Back at the RV, they finally raise someone on the radio, and after detailing their defensive capabilities to this stranger, we learn this was just a ruse, and it was the hillbillies the whole time outsmarting their prey. To pile on the ineptitude, in order to call out, Bobby had to switch his channel, which means he doesn't hear Doug's warnings. But regardless, Brenda is struck by an idea, and we see the 2 begin to unspool the cable while Jupiter and Pluto trudge along the washout toward them. Beast pursues them and waits for an opportune moment, at which point he pounces on Pluto to nibble on him before running off, leaving his Achilles tendon absolutely shredded. As a result, Jupiter puts out the call to kill the baby, which is picked up by Doug on the radio, sending him into a murderous rage. Ruby, still not comfortable with the overall plan, brings the baby to Mars, and it's revealed that she pulled the old pig swap on him, leaving him to look a fool as she betrays them by running off to meet up with Doug the normie. Meanwhile, we observe phase 2 of Brenda's big plan, which involves putting Mama in a lawn chair. As they set up, we see that Jupiter continued on, refusing to let Pluto slow him down. As a result, Beast has returned and, again, picks a prime spot to jump in on him, this time squeezing his jugular until rendered dead. With him out of the way, the pair just have to worry about Jupiter, who's busy pondering the dead woman he's run across in the desert. This initiates phase 3, fire up the wagon to drag Jupiter by his feet and discourage him a little bit. This turns out to be the failing point of the grand plan, because when the cable snaps, he seems to be more encouraged about completing the task of murdering them slowly. So they fall back through the RV, where we see they've rigged up a propane tank to explode if he opens the door. They then hide in the washout, nervous about whether or not he'll take the bait. The RV does explode, but wise Bobby wants to make sure they got him. Jupiter seems to have been caught up in the explosion, but is still capable of attacking them. So Brenda runs up and puts a tomahawk in his back while Bobby releases his last 2 bullets into his front. Now we're down to a final battle of wills and brawn. Out in the wilderness between two men about the business of a stolen baby. Doug hulks out, busting Mars with some rocks and nimbly galloping about the folds and crevices. Ruby attempts to help with a distraction, but then Katie starts crying in the distance, giving away her position. When Mars turns his attention to her, Doug goes wild style on him, flailing and screaming and fingering his moist leg flap. The whole time Doug is very nearly dying, Ruby is off practicing her snake charming skills, which comes in clutch when she successfully transplants a dangerous rattler onto Mars' neck, allowing Doug to finish the job violently, thus earning the right to keep his daughter. I have a website set up where you can support the channel through donations or merch. I'd like to take a moment to give a huge thanks to my donors memorialized in the Hall of Headshots. The Hills Have Eyes is an early Wes Craven classic. It definitely bumped up close to certain lines that were considered salacious at the time, but are fairly common conversational topics in modernity, such as eating babies. If you enjoyed the video, I'd love for you to become a part of the channel by subscribing. Thanks for watching.